Well, that's a powerful story. And that story is a story about Renee, and yet that is probably your story, and it's a lot of our stories in this room tonight. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a conversation up here. This is not it's not a sermon. We're just going to kind of talk and just kind of go wherever this goes. But we want to invite you guys into this conversation, and we know that this is something that we all deal with. I'll get to that in a sec. We know that this is something we all deal with, and so what we're going to do is we're going to invite you guys to do something that may make you a little uncomfortable, but I think you'll see that this is going to be a really cool thing. We're going to throw a graphic up on the screen here, and it's going to give you just one question to respond to. And I'm going to ask you something that if you've been to church, you're going, wait, there's no way they're asking me to do this in church. I want you to get out your cell phones, and I want you to be bold enough to go ahead and text in your response to a question here. And here's the question. Which of the following have you struggled with? And we're just going to be real honest tonight, and I hope that you'll see that, listen, this is something that we all struggle with, and we all have to work through, and it's affected all of us in a different way. And so what we're going to invite you to do, while Jaime and I are up here talking, we're going to invite you guys to text in, and we're going to see kind of just in this room tonight what kind of these things that we are dealing with and what's going on. And this may be a little uncomfortable for some of you. I don't want to text in because then they know that I'm struggling with it. But here's the reality that there's a lot of us struggling with it. And so what I want you to do is, wow, you guys are really good tonight. This took them a little while last night. So if you have these different options at the bottom, just type the number at the top, that 41411, and then you have to literally type cast and then that number. And you text it in. You can text more than one of these. And we're just going to see as we're going, kind of just let you guys speak into this conversation and say, hey, that you're not alone. And if you're dealing with this and you're struggling with this, this is not you alone. And I think we'll have some hope in that. So, Jaime, I gave you a couple extra water bottles. If you guys were here last night in Mesa, Jamie's a really thirsty guy, and I don't know that he's used to Arizona yet. He's, from Florida and everything, and so he's been drinking a lot. And then last night, he didn't bring up his water bottle. He just decided to leave it down there. So we shared kind of a really intimate moment with everybody, and he had my water bottle. It was really cool. But I thought tonight, I'm gonna take care of you. So all of these are yours.
I appreciate it.
Okay, so I just need this one. But if you want this one too, I'll share that with you too.
We're going to try to have a really serious conversation with a dozen bottles of water. So
I feel good about this. Okay. So tell us how this story about Renee, which is a true story, which I know that some people kind of feel like, oh, maybe this was kind of just written and made up. But tell us how that real story about Renee and kind of those experiences with her.
Yeah, I met Renee through a friend, a mutual friend who, his story is my buddy David, and his story is really powerful, just one of a struggle with addiction and really just this really surprising, incredible redemption story, So now a story of recovery, and she heard him speak at our church back in Orlando, and this was before I met her, even knew about her, and basically she grew up in the church, grew up around the truth, had a good family, so I think that alone surprises some people. But she heard David speak and just share some of his life, and they connected, and she began to reach out to him. And I didn't know anything about this. I was renting a room from him at the time, and I remember one night, it was late, it was after midnight, and his phone rang, and he talked for a few minutes, and when he hung up, he said, hey, would you jump in the car? Would you come with me to meet this girl? And it was Renee, and he told me a little bit about her, and I remember I had to be up early the next morning for work, and I felt like maybe I should be responsible and try to get some sleep, and yet something felt really significant about it, and there was a few of us, and so I ended up jumping in the car and driving across town and meeting this girl and just being really moved by that night. And I think there was a sense of, these things were really new. And there was a sense for me of really that her life was at stake, on a lot of levels. And then really the 5 days that followed were the 5 days that I wrote about. And halfway through that time, I asked her this question that was pretty vulnerable, and I assumed the answer would be no. And I didn't even know exactly what it meant, but I just said, hey, what do you think about the possibility of telling your story? And I think first off, I wanted to capture that for myself, just because I felt things moving around in my own life. And I wanted to remember this time and these things that were happening and expected her to say no, and her face lit up and she smiled and she said she loved the idea, and she said she loved the possibility that maybe there could be a purpose for her pain, that other people could relate to the things that she had been through, and maybe if even one person could find hope in her story, that would mean so much, and it would help her make sense of her life, and so yeah, that's how it started.
So how was that one story morphed into all of this? Because we're here because it wasn't just about Renee, and you guys respond to Renee, but then you kind of saw a vision for something so much bigger. So how has that morphed into a nonprofit / t-shirt company / ministry / whatever else you guys actually end up doing?
Yeah, well, I think I was really, the response to the story just early on, just from kind of my friends and our community, like, was really encouraging, and it really meant a lot. But I think we knew really quickly that her treatment was going to cost money, and so there was a practical need there. There was a financial need, and so we started printing the shirts to try to pay for treatment. And we made a MySpace page just to give the story a home. We didn't think much more than that. We ordered 200 T-shirts, and I remember that felt like this really huge number. And basically, the surprising thing that happened was the shirts started to end up in the hands of some friends of ours who play in bands, and so these guys started to wear them on stage, and if you've seen the shirts, it's a bit of a billboard, and so people would check it out, or they'd go home and Google it, or they'd find it on MySpace, and meanwhile, it just started to spread, friends telling friends, and people sending out bulletins and posting blogs about it, and really the heart of the matter is that we realized that the story we were telling was one that represented people all over the world, that these were issues that so many people lived with, and yet there was a sense that these were things that people didn't talk much about. And I know for me, growing up in church, it wasn't much different. These were things that, for me, even at 25, 26, that I didn't know much about. And so we just felt, I think, pretty quickly that we had stumbled upon a conversation that deserved attention, And we just felt like we had this surprising platform to present hope and to point people to help and just to talk about a few good ideas that we had, and they weren't ours, they weren't original, but community and treatment and these things.
Yeah. You've used the phrase when you kind of describing this of an exaggerated response, and you've paralleled that to someone else. Kind of talk about that.
Yeah, we were talking about it yesterday, but I think there's a sense that, we set out to sell 200 T-shirts, and we set out to tell one story. We tried to help our friend in our community, just like if someone in your community was struggling. And we've seen this incredible response, from people all over the world. And I think we realized pretty quickly that it was an exaggerated response. It was more than we ever could have asked for, and her treatment needs were met. And we realized we had this opportunity to turn the corner, and couldn't help but think, like, man, isn't that a picture of Christ? Like, isn't Christ an exaggerated response to the need in my life, and to the broken places in my life? And couldn't help but think, like, man, that's really beautiful,
Who's the first person ever to wear a Trite Loving Around shirt?
It is John Foreman, who plays in a band called Switchfoot. And
I don't know if anybody's heard of that band. Yeah.
So the first time a box of shirts showed up, and I shared last night that it may have been a strategic thing, but this box of shirts shows up at a sold-out Switchfoot show in South Florida, and those guys were friends and have been friends of mine for a long time. And so I'm standing backstage, and we open this box and pull out the shirts, and we're kind of excited to see them. And John says, hey, that's really great. Like, would it be okay if I wore that on stage tonight? And it's like 3,000 people, it's sold out. And so I just play it really cool, like, yeah, John, that'd be fine,
Dude, that was so nice of you,
yeah,
man.
Yeah, and he still owes us like $20, but yeah, and it was funny because I think we went home that night, and there were messages from people that had been at the show, and that was really the beginning of it. And at the same time, we sent some shirts to the guys in Amberlin, and they were out on a nationwide tour at the time, and my buddy Dion plays the bass in that band, and I think he was out of clean clothes or something, because he basically wore the thing every night for a year, and so everywhere these bands went, we started to hear from people that had been at the shows, and so that's been a big part of our story.
Very cool. So why these issues, these issues that we're talking about, and especially from a nonprofit side, a lot of nonprofits don't deal with these type of things. So why depression and suicide and all these?
I wouldn't say that we chose them, I think all of this, even the nonprofit itself, has happened in response to the story, so these were the issues that Renee lived with. These were the issues that showed up in the story that we were telling, and these were the things that people began to share and respond to and say, hey, I live in some of those places, or I care about someone who does, or I lost someone to suicide, or suicide is something that I've thought about. And a lot of people shared, these are parts of my story that I've never opened up about, and so I think we just realized, man, this is something really significant, and so I think we realized, man, this has to be something. Like, this is something, it's becoming something on its own, and just in being good stewards, we need to figure out how to do this.